Hey there, spooky friends, and welcome to another fun-filled adventure of Scaryish.
Woo!
I don't know if it's gonna be fun-filled. It's pretty, I got true crime this week. I don't know if that's...
I liked adventure. I definitely have an adventure that I'm talking about. So
oh, yeah?
That'll be a good time. What are you covering this week, Robin?
I'm going to be covering Cropsey.
Not
the inspiration behind it, but like the real-life person that was from the same area and stuff like that.
I've never heard of Cropsey. So when you said that earlier, I was like, is that like Banksy, but with murder?
So yes, murderous paintings.
I'm going to be covering Gustav the Crocodile and the continuation of Man-Eater May. Super excited about that. I think this is the first time in like 4 weeks I haven't introduced us after you introduced us. Because I keep thinking, because we record so late, like, oh, she forgot to introduce us. And then when I go to edit it, you have absolutely introduced us already, and I do it a second time because I'm dumb.
I don't think I did it this time.
You didn't this time, and I didn't either. I'm Adam Diaz. That's Robin Grace.
Yep. That's
Hello,
me.
folks.
Hello.
And Robin is going to be leading us out for the beginning of this episode, and I'm going to turn it over to her. I will say, thank you. Big shout out to everyone who came out on Sunday to watch our first ever cooking stream.
Yes. Oh my God.
Fun.
It was
we had
really
a good time.
Fun.
It was a lot of technical difficulties getting set up, but once we were on the air, I think everything sort of smoothed out and we had a very fun time. So thank you to everyone that came out and made it super enjoyable. And maybe we'll do another one in the future. Who knows?
It was like having you all in our kitchen with us.
It was very intrusive, but in a good way. So, okay, I will turn it over to Robin. Tell us about whatever his name is. Cropsy, that's it. Tell us about Cropsy.
All right. So I'm not sure if you folks have heard this one before. Obviously, Adam hadn't heard about it at all, but I've definitely seen it crop up time and time again.
Wow.
In all sorts of places, lists, things like that, all over the internet. And that is the urban legend that's called Cropsy, who is in essence a boogeyman of sorts. The legend of Cropsy comes from Staten Island, which is I think it's the smallest borough of New York City.
Okay, that's interesting.
In New York. It's actually an urban legend. This whole thing about Cropsy, an urban legend. It's a legend or creature that lurks through neighborhoods. And it's like this creepy shadow figure that you kind of tell your kids about, right? That's seen around playgrounds and stuff like that. And a lot of people tell a story of it being like this insane, homicidal, escaped mental patient that wields an axe and has a hook for a hand. And
it's so weird that he's named Cropsy. I imagine he would be made of corn or hanging out in a cornfield or something like that. Because it's a crop.
Yeah, I get it. But he would terrorize these neighborhoods and terrify like kids, boys, girls, whatever you may identify as, and dragging them down into the tunnel system that exists under what once was the Seaview Hospital, which is now like an abandoned ruin of a building. Seaview was actually an old tuberculosis sanatorium, so that's a whole nother haunted can of worms because at a lot of those tuberculosis places, a lot of people died. And there are some places that I have read about or have watched things about where they used to just like toss all the freaking bodies down chutes and stuff like that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I've read about a couple of those as well.
So this abandoned place could probably be full of its own freaking load of ghosts.
So this urban legend shows up, drags kids away to a haunted location. So that's pretty terrifying.
Yeah. And this story was something that parents would kind of use to scare their kids.
Cautionary tale.
Yep, cautionary tale. So be good, get in bed, or Cropsy's gonna get you, you know? Same thing like with Boogeyman, right? The Boogeyman, people say like, you better be good, stay in bed, don't look in the closet, don't look under your bed, just go to sleep. Or, you know, he might come and get you, you know what I mean?
You better watch out, you better not cry,
God.
You better not pout, I'm telling you why. That's some terrifying shit right there. I don't remember who it's about, though.
Shut up. You're so stupid. I hate you. Okay. God. Okay. But, it was like an attempt to keep kids from being bad and keeping them out of the woods, keeping them away from these abandoned buildings. Supposedly there's like a summer camp iteration of the story that inspired a movie called The Burning in 1981. And I read the synopsis for it and it totally gives me like Friday the 13th-esque vibes. Cause it's like this, one guy everybody like picks on, an accident happens, he gets, physically scarred. and then goes around and starts murdering people.
Honestly, when you were telling me the origin, it kind of gave me Nightmare on Elm Street vibes. And so it's kind of that origin story mixed of like the person that gets picked on is Friday the 13th for sure.
Yeah.
The horrible scars are Nightmare on Elm Street, and then
with the school, definitely.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. You haven't gotten to the school yet, but there's a school, and there's a lot of sites that were like very Freddie, I was going to say like Freddie Mercury. No, it's very Freddie.
I want to break free.
It's very Freddy Krueger, where he's just like this super creeper, worked at a school, and then ends up, murdering kids. Spoilers if you've never seen any of those movies.
If you've never seen Nightmare on Elm Street at this point, that's on you.
So it's a legend about Staten Island's neighborhood boogeyman, pretty much. That's the whole thing with Cropsey. And it wasn't until 2009 when a documentary came out called Cropsey that the whole urban legend thing came to light, because there was actually somebody who kind of took on the name of Cropsey because of what he did. And it's not that he called himself Cropsey or anything. It's just he did what this legend seemed to say. You know what I mean? But we'll get there. I'm not saying it correctly. I'm not describing it correctly. He didn't have a fucking hook for a hand. He didn't wield an axe. He wasn't this creepy dude like that. But
if I was staring at you blankly, it's not because you weren't explaining it correctly. I literally just had like a 60-second freak out about what would happen if Freddy Krueger burst through the door.
You're so fucking stupid.
It's late. I'm tired, and he still scares me.
Oh my god. The scary part of in that the one Freddy Krueger movie that we watched, where it's like they unplug the TV and the TV's still fucking playing. They unplug the phone and the phone's still talking. Yeah. It's terrifying. Okay.
And then the murder, of course.
Oh, yeah.
The brutal murder.
The brutal murder. All right. So this documentary, Cropsey, describes something that's even more frightening than any fictitious boogeyman. It's a very real attacker, and one aimed towards the children of Staten Island. He's certainly a horror, but the other piece of the story, Willowbrook, that is also a horror that we're about to get into. So, in the 1970s, a man named Andre Rand made the terrifying story of Cropsey all too real. Andre Rand was actually born Frank Richon on March 11th, 1944, and he worked as a janitor/custodian at the Willowbrook State School, which is, or was, an institution for special needs children. Something that back then was pretty common. People just left their kids at places like that, you know what I mean? Because they couldn't handle them or whatnot. No one really knows where the name Andre Rand came from, or why he changed his name to that. There was a source that I read that back then, when people were trying to get jobs and stuff like that, they would just come up with fake names because there wasn't like a way to check. People didn't really check back then.
Background checks was basically whatever you put on your reference page.
Right.
It's like, there's an episode of Seinfeld about that where he literally just makes up a business and puts a contact for it and then gives out his friend's phone number. And he's like, hey, for the next week when you answer the phone, can you say Vandalay Industries? And he's like, what? No. And then he tells him like, you have to or I'm not going to get this job. And like, that was the way you did background checks when Seinfeld was on the air versus like the stuff we have nowadays where your business signs up for something, you punch in a social security number, and then you can actually run a decent background check.
A lot of jobs now require that. So it's something that's super common. Back then, not so much. You could just say whatever and people were like, oh, all right, sure. So his mother had actually struggled with mental illness herself and had lived at the Pilgrim State Asylum. And when he was 14, his father died. His mother got institutionalized. So him and his younger sister would visit her there. And it's not necessarily surprising that he would take a job at the Willowbrook School because people say that when you grow up and you have a family member that suffers like that, and you're always at the institution like that you're more inclined to get a job in a helpful profession. That's just what I've read on the interwebs. I am not a psychologist.
It totally makes sense, though. I think that makes sense.
There's a lot of people who have people that are ill in their lives, and they're like, I'm going to become a doctor because I want to figure out
motivational.
Yeah.
I want to cure this thing, or I want to learn more about it, and that just leads into a career.
So it's just something that some people do. So it's not surprising that he would want to work at an institution similar to that. Willowbrook was a school that's not far from Seaview, which is the tuberculosis place. So this new school, not too far from there. It was first opened in 1938 as a home for disabled children, then used as an army hospital during World War II. Then after the war, it took on the role of a school. So Willowbrook operated for 40 years, during which there were numerous reports of mistreatment of its students because people just don't know how to handle them, right? So there's mistreatment.
People are also pieces of garbage and just sort of do that anytime they're entrusted with another human being.
So there's mistreatment of its students. It had an overwhelming population of students. Some sources I saw, it was like supposedly in the thousands. So some were saying like there was only room there for like 4,000 people, but they had 6,000 kids. So the kids were just crammed in there. Robert F. Kennedy had actually called Willowbrook a quote-unquote snake pit in 1965. There was even an expose in 1972 similar to that, which put other sanitariums out of business too. There were cuts in funding, so there's like skeleton crew and staff. There's not enough. It's like 6,000 kids, 500 staffers, right? There's not enough people to take care of all these kids. And many of these people on the staff were untrained in caring for these kids, especially when they have disabilities, things like that. When you're not checking people's
credentials.
Yeah, you're just hoping
you're hiring
that
basically
it works.
anyone who applies. Like I've interviewed folks before, and I've had like someone always there with me. I've never done a solo interview except for like retail, and I've had people tell me afterwards like I'd hire them. And I'd be like, I won't. Like there's a ton of red flags. Like what are you talking about? It's like I'm just looking for anyone with a pulse. I have literally heard that multiple times with background checks nowadays. Like, can you imagine that mindset when it's like you could make up whatever you wanted and you wouldn't have to worry about clearing a background check?
It's freaking crazy, dude. I don't know how people do that. I've had horrible interviews where someone, we always ask, what do you want to do in 5 years? That's like typical interview question. Yeah, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And one of these interviewers said, I would like to work at AT&T. I was like, we're not AT&T, but thank you, and we'll call you. You know what I mean? Like, no.
Like, just for the young folks out there that might be listening to this, or anyone going into an interview soon, that question is meant to be professional, not personal, because I've asked that exact same question before, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And the response that I got was about baseball, and how they wanted to travel and see all the stadiums. And I was like, that sounds cool. That's like totally a bucket list thing that I know a lot of people have. What about professionally? And they just had this blank stare on their face, and I was just like, cool, thank you for coming in today.
Anyway, back to the serious stuff. That's our fucking interview tip corner. So these children suffered a lot because there weren't people to take care of them. So they're sitting in their own crud. They're not clean. These children suffered from supposed rampant sexual abuse, corporal punishment, which means people were beating them. There was no teaching of social skills or of personal grooming or personal hygiene. Supposedly these kids were even used in hepatitis research.
Wow.
So they would intentionally inject healthy children with the virus, and a lot of them would get sick because they're just testing them out, right?
They're
like,
using
what's
them
gonna
like
happen?
guinea pigs.
It's really, really messed up. The place was renamed Staten Island Development Center in 1974, but that obviously wouldn't last. They tried to get better, but it kept backsliding, and eventually the school closed in 1987. So that's a horror in and of itself. The whole thing that happens with Rand, like his whole era of terror, happens during the Satanic Panic too. So there's that whole thing. There's a lot that goes into this that kind of stacks where you're like, this is absolutely horrific. That being said, Rand had actually left the school in 1966. So long before the school closed, he'd already left. Though he left his job, he never necessarily left the area. he and numerous others set up camps around the grounds and in the underground tunnels that would connect the buildings. Which is super creepy that there's no security to be like, yo, you can't build your camp here.
It's super creepy to think that there's someone living in the underground tunnels beneath you that you might not even know exists.
Well, a lot of ex-patients and people like that would start creating camps and places there's nowhere for them to go. So they just live there. There are those that think the history of him working at Willowbrook influenced his crimes against children. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it did, because they abused kids so much. You know what I mean? And it doesn't necessarily mean that it made him do bad things. Maybe he did bad things because he wanted to do better for the kid, you know? So it's this huge thing. So the first disappearance occurred in 1972. A 5-year-old Alice Pereira disappeared on July 10th, 1972, after having played with her brother just a few miles southeast of Willowbrook. Her brother had left her alone for just a minute.
Wow.
Like just one moment, and he turned around, she's gone. At this point, Rand had already served some time in prison for the abduction of some children that I'll tell you about later. Then in 1981, a 7-year-old named Holly Ann Hughes, on July 15th, 1981, she goes to buy a bar of soap with her friend. She never comes home. So her parents file a missing persons report. This time it's reported by eyewitnesses that Rand was seen with her the day that she disappeared. So he pulls up in a Volkswagen and pulls her in and drives off. She's with her friend the whole time too. So it's like, what the fuck, you know? Then in 1983, Rand is released from prison. Soon after, on August 14th, an 11-year-old named Taissa Jackson never returns home. In 1984, a 22-year-old, Hank Gafforio, goes missing. He supposedly isn't a very smart guy. So, like, one of the sources was like, he has an IQ of 70. But it's like...
Fuck you.
Yeah, come on, that's fucking fucked up. So some sources say he had a low IQ. I don't know, obviously. I'm not going to look up...
Right.
Like, details about his IQ. That's just saying he has that low an IQ is pretty rude. But, he's last seen at a diner in the early morning hours with Rand. And he wasn't a child, but is still linked to him. So they connect them together.
So you mentioned between the second and the third disappearance, it was like 72 to 81, which seems to be the biggest, gap between them, but that he was in prison. Was he in prison for the crimes that they thought he committed or something separate?
Separate. Okay. Something separate. Okay, but we'll get into all the reasons why he goes to jail. Okay. None of those victims are ever found. They're still not found.
Wow.
The final victim was in 1987. A 12-year-old named Jennifer Schweiger was a girl that happened to have Down syndrome. On July 9th, 1987, she had told her parents she was going for a walk one summer day, and that was the last time that they ever saw her alive. I find it very odd that a lot of these disappearances happen in or around July. So a lot of these happen around the same time in July or like the beginning of August.
It's like he has a hunting season.
Yeah, it's very strange. It sounds really sketch or maybe even purposeful. Again, Satanic Panic Satanic Panic era. So who knows? People think that maybe these children were sacrifices or something like that, because of the time period that it happened in. So it's very, very odd. A massive search was conducted. They searched nearby empty lots, nearby woodland parkland, and while searching near Willowbrook, 35 days after her disappearance, a firefighter discovers a patch of ground that had been covering Jennifer's body, and they had found a little foot that was sticking out.
Oh no.
She had been buried in a shallow grave. And she's the only one that they find. So, nearby, Rand had actually set up a makeshift campsite behind the school. So, with his history, police quickly arrest him and charge him with the murder. Because she's found near there, he's camped out there near there, that it's just, they go together, right? So they're like, okay, you must be the murderer. His record of being an ex-con and having committed crimes against children in the past made the public think that it was going to be quick case, he'd get nailed with it, and that would be it. In 1969, so almost 20 years prior to Jennifer's murder, he had already been arrested in South Bronx for attempting to rape a young girl. He was sentenced to 4 years. He only served 16 months.
So attempted rape, 16 months.
Yes. In 1983, while he worked for the Staten Island school bus company, he actually kidnapped 11 children. So
what the fuck, dude?
He kidnapped 11 children from a local YMCA. He took them on a joyride, pretty much. He bought them lunch, and then he drove them to Newark Airport in New Jersey. And for no reason, apparently. It was a 5-hour joyride. And they don't know why he took them to Newark. So it's just very, very odd. I am super sketchy about that because he obviously had other ideas.
Right.
Or
he had an intention
plan,
for taking them
but
there.
he backed out of it instead, So it's a very creepy. This was why he was in jail in 1983 for 10 months. Despite all that history, though, there was no concrete evidence that linked him to the murder. In 1988, it was decided that he'd be convicted just of kidnapping. So kidnapping in the first degree, sentenced to 25 years in prison. For the murder, the jury couldn't come to a decision. They couldn't decide on whether or not he was guilty about it. So the guilty murder charge just fell through. So he was just arrested for kidnapping, and that was that. I don't know how they pinned the kidnapping on him and not the murder, but that's what happened. 2004, 16 years later, he was a few years away from being eligible for parole when the Holly Ann Hughes case came to light. So, the one that I already told you guys about before, his fellow inmate had been taking notes on conversations that he had had with Rand.
Wow.
So during these conversations, Rand went into detail about how he had abducted her. Rand was quoted in a conversation stating, quote, me and Ted Bundy, are alike in many ways. We both used Volkswagens. Bundy's was women. My thing is kids. Do you think police could figure that out? End quote.
Wow.
How fucked up is that? Like, what the? It's just, are you an idiot? Like, that's so messed up.
He's a monster is what he is.
He is an absolute monster. Like, oh my God. He's comparing himself to Ted Bundy, dude. Like,
he's bragging about it.
Yeah.
Me and Bundy.
New evidence was also brought forward. As people had reported, he was seen with her that day, and he was convicted of kidnapping her as well. So, new evidence came out. He was convicted of that. He was sentenced to another 25 years in prison because of it. So imagine being that close to getting to apply for parole, and they're like, nah, dog, here's another 25 years.
It's like, so we found more stuff you did.
It's like playing Uno, and you're like, here, pick up another 4 cards. You know what I mean? It's freaking crazy. He's not eligible for parole until 2037.
Good.
He will be 93 years old if he lives that long.
In parentheses, hopefully dead.
Yeah. I kept wondering, like, I wonder if he's dead already, but there's no articles on him being dead
so
already.
He's totally going to be still alive, yeah.
The documentary, Cropsey, that came out in 2009, goes over the man himself. So it goes over Andre Rand and includes interviews from people that were involved in everything that happened. So victims, detectives, it goes over whether or not Rand was actually even guilty, and brings up the idea of prejudices against people like him who were homeless, outskirts. Just because he had a history, they just pinned this on him and didn't necessarily give him a fair trial. Like, they had no hard evidence tying him to any of the murders. So this documentary goes over a lot of different things. Like, was his history the only reason why they booked him? Some think he was on some twisted crusade to stop the quote-unquote suffering of children.
By causing the suffering of children.
Well, because he went out of his way to target, disabled children. So it's like he saw how much they were hurting in the school, in the institution. So he's like, I'm just going to put you out of your misery because I saw how they were treated there and it's awful. That's what some people think. So there's a lot that this documentary goes over. And if you guys are interested, it has a 6.3 out of 10 on IMDb. So
Robin's a ratings whore when it comes to IMDb.
So it's probably not everyone's cup of tea. But some of the land around Seaview and Willowbrook have been sold to developers and even the College of Staten Island. There are still decrepit and abandoned buildings that are there, even though parts of it have been sold off, you know. There's still these creepy places that are still standing. Many think that there are bodies that are still hidden beneath the weeds or the trash or the debris that is there.
I can't believe they wouldn't, like, scout this entire area to see what they could come up with.
Well, okay. So, though the story of Cropsey revolves around the abandoned buildings and these underground tunnels, it just doesn't stop people from telling tales of being snatched straight from their homes. Tales to kind of scare their kids, because these victims were abducted from their neighborhoods, you know. It doesn't seem so far-fetched once you know that there was someone out there that really did these things. So some urban legends are so much more terrifying when you know they're real. And I know I've covered a couple urban legends that have turned out to be real in the past, like dead bodies and freaking hotel beds and stuff like that. There's a volunteer group called Friends of Jennifer for Missing Children. And this volunteer group actually performs a search twice a year over Willowbrook's 385 acres in hopes that they will one day find some evidence of the missing girls. And it's been, almost 40 years or something like that. So it's really crazy.
I can't believe the police wouldn't take dogs out there and just search the fucking area. That's so nuts, man.
I wonder if they did and they just couldn't find anything.
I wonder if this is if this is the case of, like, life imitating art, basically, where the tale of Cropsey had been told so much that one person sort of assumed the persona, or if it was just like this guy didn't even know what that was, and then this urban legend wound up attaching to him because he was so similar to what everyone was kind of afraid would happen, or the cautionary tale that people had been using. But either way, it's terrifying.
It is terrifying. It's just really sad, and it makes me afraid for kids in this day and age too, with like all the social media and the stupid fucking catfishing and online predators, and it's just absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, it's definitely a different way to be scared now.
Yeah.
And then the old way still exists. So thank you for that topic, and I think we can all have nightmares tonight. So
yeah, thanks.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
All right, before we move into my topic, we're going to take a quick commercial break. And we are back. So this week, I'm going to keep the man-eater train a-rolling. No, this is not a topic about a man-eating train, which I really hoped it would be. I'm saving that for next week. It's called Thomas. That's the name of the train. And it's actually what Thomas the Train is based off of.
The man-eating tank engine. Got it.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, actually next week we figured out, like, hey, I kind of want to cover this. And I was like, well, I kind of want to cover this. And they're both man-eating topics. So you're going to get a double dose of Man-Eater to end Man-Eater May. Very fucking excited about it. Not going to tell you what it's going to be. No spoilers there, but it's nice to actually have our topics picked out for next week. 7 days in advance. It's pretty nice, right? Okay, cool. So
now we can research in advance.
Right? This week I am covering another request actually from the community for May. And it's one that I had actually never heard of before. So shout out to Cody over there on the Facebook group, the Spooky Friends group, for bringing this one up. So without further ado, Spooky Friends, I present to you Gustav the Crocodile. So before we get into this, I will tell you that Gustav the Crocodile, like all the animals so far that I have covered for Man-Eater May, is the inspiration for a film as well. Although it's one I've never seen before, it's something called Primeval, which came out in 2007. It's a movie that has Orlando Jones. It has a few other actors and actresses that I've heard of. Orlando Jones in particular is the one that I recognize, like, oh my god. Just so you know, Orlando Jones.
Replacements.
Yes, he's the wide receiver from The Replacements.
You know,
he's also the Make 7 Up Yours.
There's some actors that I'm just like, who the fuck is that? And there's some random ones like,
I thought I would have to explain for 5 minutes who the fuck Orlando Jones was to Robin, but she knew immediately.
I just love Replacements. The Replacements is one of my favorite movies of all time. Like,
I don't know if they were trying to make a masterpiece of cinema, but they absolutely did. And if you don't like Replacements, we're not friends. Don't. They
got Kukanu.
So Kukanu, like Gene Hackman, Orlando Jones, Jon Favreau. Holy shit, that movie's stacked.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
So this is it's funny that I'm doing that because I'm about to go over some other stuff too. I've never seen the movie Primeval from 2007. However, it definitely looks like it's based off like man-eating crocodile horror. They actually like hype this trailer up like they're talking about a serial killer. They actually say in the trailer, the most prolific serial killer of human history or some other shit like that. And then like, he's not human. And it's like, oh, that's weird. But it definitely looks like a horror.
It's like Crawl.
Yeah, it kind of feels like that. Absolutely. I have seen a man-eating crocodile movie in my past, however, called Lake Placid. I don't know how many of you folks out there have seen it. If you haven't, that movie is definitely a cinematic masterpiece. Bridget Fonda is the lead and she's phenomenal. Bill Pullman's in it as well. Bill Pullman is the president from Independence Day.
It's the guy from Casper.
It's not Bill Paxton, who is from
True Lies.
Yes, he's the car salesman in True Lies, amongst a million other things. He's Morgan in Tombstone, bunch of other stuff. Getting back to Lake Placid, Oliver Platt is in it. Brendan Gleeson is in it. Betty White is in it. Good God, this movie's stacked. Betty White at one point utters the line, "If I had a dick, this is where I'd tell you to suck it."
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Wait, oh my God.
The movie is so freaking good. So if you've never seen Lake Placid, go check it out. It's 100% a comedy. It's a comedy that also has a man-eating crocodile in the background, and the cast is what makes that movie. If you don't know who Brendan Gleeson is, that's Mad Eye Moody, by the way. So,
oh, what?
He's amazing in everything he's in as well. So, anyways, the movie that was inspired by Gustave is about him. It's not like the whole, like, this is loosely based on true events. It's straight up about this man-eating crocodile in this part of the world. It's definitely a horror movie, kind of in the vein of Anaconda, but I don't think it has as much camp as Anaconda had. But again, I haven't seen it. So, let's talk about the real story of this crocodile. This story takes place, again, on the African continent, similar to last week's, in the Republic of Burundi. I don't have an exact year for you because it kind of takes place all over the 80s and 90s and early 2000s.
So this thing lives forever?
No. I mean, it's not immortal, Robin. Good Lord.
Okay.
But it's definitely like kind of nebulous where you could say the story starts. So I don't have one of those, y'all remember blah, 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 blah. No, I don't got one of those this week. So.
Okay.
That said, let's start out with the estimated date of late 90s. So this definitely took place in our lifetime, or in my lifetime. Some of you folks might be younger. And the man that brought this story to light is a herpetologist, I think that's how you say it, named Patrice Fay. Patrice Fay was a Frenchman whose love of travel wound up leading him to South Africa and eventually to Burundi. And while studying the local amphibians and reptiles, which is what a herpetologist does if you didn't know, he began to hear stories about a very large crocodile that was different than the others. And here's something cool about covering man-eaters like Gustave. He's not a cryptid. He's not an urban legend. He's not a myth. He's fucking real. So when you start digging into these, it's not like, oh, what were the sightings like? Do the descriptions differ? No, he's real. There are pictures of him. He is identifiable.
Did he grow up in sewers and therefore came in contact with like nuclear material or something, like mutant teenage ninja turtles?
I believe he was bit by a radioactive crocodile and then he turned into this. No, Robin, he's a Nile crocodile, which means there are others like him, but there's only one Gustave. So
what made him different?
Sometimes you get a big boy. I think
sometimes you get a big boy.
What they said is he is like his size and his girth, his weight is like a 1 in a 100,000 capture. So it's not impossible. There's millions of crocodiles, I think. But it's not something that's not been seen before. The largest crocodile in captivity is a little bit smaller, and it died in like 2013.
Oh, sad face.
It's a little bit smaller than Gustave, but Nile crocodiles on average, if they're males, from tail to snout are around 14 feet in length. The females are around 12 feet, but they vary a lot more than the males. I think it was 13 to 14 feet for the males, and then like 7.5 to 12 feet for the females. Okay.
They really missed out on like the naming. I don't know why they named him Gustave. They should have named him Bill. Because then he'd be Bill Nile the crocodile. Holy fuck, dude.
I'll send this guy a letter and let him know what a missed opportunity he had.
He's such a missed opportunity.
The males in this case of Nile crocodiles get up to around 1,700 pounds at their heaviest. The females weigh in at around 550 pounds. They are much slimmer. And if you were looking at crocodiles like on the shore, you can pick out like that's a female, that's a female, that's a male. They call the males bulls, by the way. So when they're describing these crocodiles, and by they I should actually say when Patrice was describing these crocodiles and some of the stuff that he was doing, he was noting that there were 2 bulls in the area. One of them basically owned this estuary and would hang out there, and that was his hunting grounds. And then every now and then, this bull that was definitely bigger would show up, and the bull that owned the estuary would fuck off. He would leave the area, and he would only come back when the bigger bull had left.
Huh.
So he named them. One of them, I think it's like some sort of, he's from France, and I think it was something that was culturally related to someone who was smaller, and then the big bully. And I think the big bully was Gustave, and that's where that came from. So it's not like he like knew Bill Nye the Science Guy and was Gustave.
Oh, it's cute. To me, he'll always be Bill Nye the Crocodile.
So now, for animals like lions or sharks or crocodiles, most of these creatures typically do not hunt humans at all. If we wind up in their habitat, in most cases, even if they feel threatened, like sure, they can mess you up real good, but for the most part, they'll give you a fair warning to fudge right the fudge off.
Really?
You know? They'll warn you, like they'll nip you. They'll do something where they want you to leave them alone.
Imagine getting nipped by a crocodile.
Like think about like the images of that mountain lion that chased that guy, where he like walked backwards for 5 miles. And it was chasing him out of its territory, like getting him to go away. It could have just fucking charged him and killed him immediately, you know?
That's
but
true.
It's not like they're outwardly hunting human beings. They're aggressive to things that come into their territory.
Okay.
Doesn't mean you're not going to get bit. There's videos of those idiots that are like, I'm just going to jump in the water with all these crocodiles. And guess what? Dude died. Don't do that.
Well, I mean, I watched like a little bit of Swamp People the other day where they hunt crocodiles. Like, what the French toast, dude? I would not willingly do that as a living.
I wouldn't either. But
That's
sometimes
terrifying.
that's the only living that you can make.
That is very true.
So,
and it's very, if you can do that, you are courageous and brave, and I don't know how you do it.
It winds up being regrettable when folks have to share the habitat with a creature that will become aggressive if you overlap. So if you live somewhere where you're going to have to go to the bank of that river the crocodile's living in, you learn how to coexist or to avoid basically being attacked. So that's not something that's normal. Human beings aren't typically prey. We see ourselves as top of the food chain, but when you have something like this, and like the previous topics for the month of May, that kind of changes. The human beings do become prey, and that is the case with Gustave. The legend of Gustave is that he's over 100 years old. Nile crocodiles in the wild have an average lifespan of 70 to 100 years. So you can get some that live older, some that live less. Side note, the exact same type of Nile crocodile will only live for around 50 to 60 years in captivity. Captivity sucks. It is very hard on animals, and it shortens their lifespan significantly.
Same thing with like killer whales or orcas?
Pretty much anything that's in captivity has a drastically reduced lifespan, except for some smaller creatures. Like, I don't want to get into that.
Dude, a killer whale would be good for Man-Eater May, too.
I don't know if I have one, but there's definitely been killer whale attacks, though, but I'll look into it. We might have to save it for Man-Eater May of 2022.
I just am thinking of, like, when they're in captivity and their poor fins, they flop over, which doesn't necessarily happen in the wild.
If you're feeling bad for animals, don't worry, because the animals are about to get even in this story.
Okay.
So Patrice sets off with some locals to locate the croc that was Gustave. And sure enough, after spending some time on the banks of the Ruzizi River, which feeds into a lake that is very prominent in this area, in this country, a crocodile shows up that leaves no doubt that Gustave is the crocodile that the locals talk about. The locals didn't have him named Gustave. He's just the big fucking crocodile, however they say that in the local parlance. But a few things that Patrice, the herpetologist, observed when he laid eyes on Gustavo is that the first is that the locals were not lying about his size. They had claimed that he was just over 20 feet long, and when seeing him for the first time, Patrice estimated he was between 18 and a half and 21 feet long.
That's giant.
You can't measure it because you're not going to get in there with a tape measure like, stay still, big guy.
Dude, this room, okay, so this room is
10 by 10.
This room, oh my god. Oh my god.
So I actually have this next part dedicated to Robin's imagination. So can you imagine seeing a crocodile that was 21 feet long?
No.
So Robin, I want you to close your eyes. And imagine this. So just imagine that you're laying in bed next to me. It's something that we do every night. I'm slightly taller than you, maybe by 5 or 6 inches, okay? Now, instead of laying in bed next to me, just imagine that you're laying outside and I'm next to you, all right? Because you need the space. Now imagine you turn your head like you normally do, and when you open your eyes, instead of seeing me, my beautiful face, you see a thick, green, scaled hide.
Oh wait, that's not you?
No. It's your ankles.
Fuck you!
And it's not something slightly taller than you like I am. It's something almost 4 times my length. Like, it's almost that long. You're so small compared to it that it actually might not see you if you initially start to panic because
it could swallow me whole.
It's much, much bigger than you are. But if it were to roll onto you because it didn't see you,
I'd be dead.
Simply based off of its size, you'd certainly be crushed because estimates put Gustave at 2,000 pounds, which is literally a ton.
Icky Vicky.
A ton is 2,000 pounds. A metric ton's 2,205. We're crazy here in America. We always have to have things different. 21 feet long, 2,000 pounds. This creature is enormous. And one thing about the legend of Gustave that did get dispelled when it was seen by Patrice, who is someone who is an expert in this field, was Gustave's age. Everyone said he's over 100 years old. He's been attacking people for that long. One way you actually measure a crocodile's age without getting to them or taking samples from them is their teeth. And it's primarily because a crocodile will lose their teeth throughout their lifetime. So a croc that's that old, around 100 years, is basically pretty close to having all of its major teeth missing.
Really?
Gustave had a full smile. He had not lost teeth yet.
So he was still really young.
So they're like looking at him, and Patrice noticed this, and there's no missing major teeth. And while this is not unheard of in an older crocodile, it is definitely rare. But along with the coloring and the general condition of his hide, he put his age at, quote, 60 at the oldest. He postulated that Gustave was likely much younger than 60 and, quote, still growing. So 20 feet long and growing. And much like cryptids, I will now give you a description of the body of Gustave. He has 3 separate wounds on his body that people pretty typically identify just by looking at him that look very similar to bullet scars. And they say it's because he's been shot so many times. He has a big, deep wound on his right shoulder blade where it looks like a hunk of him has basically been taken out and healed.
Jesus.
It doesn't prohibit him from moving. However, that particular wound is the one he's most readily identifiable because of. No one knows exactly what happened to his right shoulder, but when you see him, you're like, that's him. I know that's him. So Patrice studied Gustave's hunting pattern, and it became apparent that his size did not allow him to hunt faster, more agile prey like zebra or antelope in particular that the other crocodiles would hunt. It's just, he's too big. They're too quick. He could not catch them. And you would think that if you're too big to hunt prey, you're going to shrink or get sick or die. But instead, Gustave hunted wildebeest, which if you're comparing things, it's like going from a deer to a moose almost in the increase in size, which is fucking significant. Wildebeest are tall. They're not super heavy though. I will say that. And he would also hunt hippos because they're slow. Hippos are fucking huge and also super dangerous and not typically hunted by crocodiles, by the way. And he was just strong enough to take them down. So that's what he would normally feed on.
Adam literally showed me a picture today of this huge croc that had a freaking hippo in its mouth. It was nuts.
There's a picture of Gustave taking down a wildebeest and it makes the wildebeest look small. And I was like, wait, aren't wildebeest big? So I Googled it's like 6 feet. And I'm like, that wildebeest is as tall as I am, standing up, not on its hind legs, just standing. So I'm like, that fucking crocodile is enormous and terrifying.
So terrifying.
So in addition to these two things, Gustave was more than willing to hunt humans. Now,
because we're little.
Here is where the topic separates from the previous two man-eater topics. There isn't a ton of well-documented, it happened on this day, it happened at this time, this is that person's name, regarding the attacks. There is some of that, don't get me wrong. But a lot of these are kind of part of the legend of Gustave. I did wind up finding some stuff that has dates and names that I can't pronounce. But we're going to get into some of the more legendary things that Gustave is known for. And then the hunt that became like this documentary on PBS of trying to capture him.
Wow, there's a documentary
because,
on it?
Essentially what is about to unfold here is this guy Patrice realizes Gustave's not fake. He finds him, he sees him, he's like, this thing's terrifying. And then he starts talking to the locals. When he talks to the locals, he realizes he's a very serious threat that needs to be dealt with and how that sort of unfolds. So let's just move forward with it. So Patrice spoke with local fishermen who would actually free dive into the waters of the Ruzizi River and the lake nearby named Lake Tanganyika. I think I'm saying that correctly. The river obviously flows into the lake. The first thought that went into my head is why? Why would you dive in a crocodile-infested waters?
Sometimes you have to do it.
Because it's not just Gustave in there. The lake actually contains cichlid fish, which are very nice fish that can sell for like $150 each.
Whoa.
They're like premium aquarium fish.
Oh, they're aquarium
They're really,
fish.
really pretty fish. And they're mostly in the lake. So they'll just fucking dive in. And they're trying to catch them while they're in the water. I guess it's easier that fucking way. I don't know if they catch them with their bare hands. Who knows? But that's usually why they go in when they're asked why do they go in. And that's $150 American money, so it goes a very long way where they're from. And they informed him, Patrice, when they were hanging out with him, of the danger of Crocs being nearby and how you have to manage that, but how different it was being near Gustave. And they didn't have the name for him yet, but when you saw that particular crocodile, not only were you going to stay in the boat, you needed to leave, because he was there to hunt you. It wasn't just like if you jump in the water, you're in deep shit. It's like, if he's there, he's going to come after you one way or the other. He just inspires fear. He's literally a monster. So they told Patrice that one of their partners a couple years ago had actually been eaten by this enormous crocodile. They recognized the Croc as the man-eater. They all recognize him based off this divot in his shoulder. And it's known to kill a few folks a year, and then it'll disappear for some time, sometimes even a few years, but it always comes back to kill again. So this is the first time he hears about this. Then a chief in the Kabizi village told Patrice that people of his village spoke of a crocodile larger than a hippo. So they're used to seeing all these wildlife, and they're like, that crocodile is bigger than a hippo. And in a 3-month period in his village, 17 of their villagers had been killed by this crocodile.
Oh my goodness.
One attack in particular happened on land in the village, not even near the water. A 15-year-old who was studying at their local school went outside when a massive creature attacked him. They had guard and soldiers there who rushed over, and it was Gustave, this huge crocodile, just ripping him to pieces and carrying him off. And while Gustave was carrying him off, they fired their Kalashnikovs at him, which is an AK-47.
I did not know that.
Now you know. And they fired at him, and they stated, and this is kind of lost in translation, and he admits this much, but Patrice says that they told him, quote, the creature swallowed the bullets. It acted like it wasn't even being shot. It went into the water. They never saw the boy again. Patrice decided to speak with the local governments and the local police to see if they had records of this crocodile, because clearly, if these things he's hearing is true, this must have been happening for some time. And so he basically goes into these local governments and these police stations, and they're like, hell yeah, we've heard of him.
I mean,
and they just take out a big fucking file. They've been collecting records dating back to 1987 from crocodile attacks just related to Gustave.
I mean, if he's been alive for at max 60 years,
they
that's
put his
still,
birthday
like,
at 1955, which is the year my dad and your dad were born.
Wow.
Which I thought was hilarious.
Nice.
But yeah, they have records. So they stated that the attacks follow a cycle, and the people around they're very knowledgeable of this cycle, much like Pennywise the Clown, except for the knowledgeable part. The attacks would take place between October and February, give or take a few months, and during that time, multiple victims would be killed or taken away basically constantly. It would just like happen all of a sudden in a flurry. Then in February or March, the attacks would stop. The creature would go quiet for 3 years. Basically, they wouldn't have attacks for 3 years.
He's probably healing or something.
I think he just has an abundance of whatever he needs. They recovered a lot of the victims. So there's a lot of lost in translation exchange of how many people has Gustave killed versus how many people has Gustave eaten. Because those numbers are very different, because he would attack people, kill them, thrash them about, they'd be terrible, terrible messes, and then leave them. He was hunting people. He would just kill people because he saw them. He ventured into their territory and decided to kill them. They came near him. And in some cases, he literally walked into villages and murdered people.
Imagine this 21-foot alligator trying to walk through the office door right now.
He wouldn't be able to fit in here.
It's nuts.
Like, he's so fucking big. It's terrifying. So Patrice decides that he's going to check his records of observation, since he realizes that he's been observing this killer crocodile with the records of attacks that have happened nearby. And sure enough, he's realizing that all the days where he was observing his habitat, where he did not appear, are days that correlated with attacks where people have been killed or attacked, in most cases killed, by this massive crocodile that the entire region is terrified of. So he's basically breaking it down, realizing like these aren't just other crocodiles attacking human beings. It's this one super alpha crocodile that leaves, goes and attacks someone, and then comes back to basically like his stomping ground, so to speak. So as he's putting this together, it's kind of like assembling like a true crime scenario where you're realizing you're catching your suspect, but you actually have to go catch your suspect.
Okay.
So when I was watching stuff about Gustave, I found a documentary that's not the particular one from CBS that I got to read a lot about, where they interviewed locals, and there was one dude who survived an attack from Gustave, and he lifts his shirt, and you can just basically see his entire chest is like an oval it's just like scar tissue and missing skin.
Like a shark attack kind of thing.
Yeah, very similar, where he was bitten and let go. And he basically says, like, he was dead for however many minutes before they brought him back. And then he couldn't get up. He couldn't move for months at a time so his body could heal. But he's just one of the few people that Gustave let go or thought was dead already. And it's just horrific how bad this guy looked when he lifted his shirt. It's a really low quality video. So I was like trying to get a screenshot where I could post it onto our Instagram. It basically just comes out like a big, like blob mess because the quality is so bad on it. But there is other stuff that I have that I will totally post to the Instagram. So, after they gather enough information, and by they, again, I just mean Patrice. I don't know why I keep saying they. He decides that something needs to be done, and he's going to get a group together, and they are going to go capture Gustave. So he decides he's going to film this adventure after securing financial backing. And there are various spots you can read about this particular story, like Web Archive, I think is where I got most of my stuff from, Nat Geo. You can also watch the documentary if you're able to locate it because it was aired on PBS. And there's this documentary called Capturing the Killer Croc. That's what it's called. And it came out in 2004, at the end of 2004. The pattern from the 80s shifted in the 90s and again in the 2000s. So the 3-year gap isn't always being followed anymore. And the hunting period of October to February also has started to widen, basically. He's basically hunting whenever he wants.
Does it happen to have anything to do with temperature? I just think because, in that period of time, the world's temperatures have changed. Maybe the climate has changed a little bit and it widens his...
He still, for the most part, according to this, has access to all the things he could eat for sustenance. He just hunts people for fun. So he's just not disappearing as often anymore. He's sort of sticking around to this place that he has been so successful at feeding and killing things. So they go in February of 2004 to try and capture and record Gustave, and the feeding frenzy is already sort of kicked up, and they're trying to figure out where it's happening right now. So they hear reports of a crocodile, quote, as big as a boat, being seen in local fishing spots along the shore of Lake Tanganyika. So they go there to find out if he's there or not. When they go to locate it, he's already moved on. They started speaking with some of the local fishermen because that's where they got a lot of the information from last time. And they eventually learned that a group of fishermen had spotted this massive crocodile feasting on everything in sight outside the town of Magera. So they go to Magera. When they arrive in town, they learned basically what they had been hoping to prevent. So on March 8th, a 14-year-old had been killed by Gustave. March 10th, an adolescent with no age given was killed by Gustave. 2 more days later, another adolescent with no age given was killed by Gustave. They all have names that I cannot pronounce and I don't want to try, because it doesn't sound good.
You don't want to butcher it?
I don't want to butcher it. So, but these people have names, they have dates where they passed away. March 14th, a teenage boy was killed. March 15th, another teenage boy was killed. It's basically in 1 week, 5 kids were killed in a single village. The crocodile had already moved on, so in searching for him, Patrice comes across a man named Audifax Hatungamana. Audifax was the rare Gustave survivor. Not the same one that I was talking about, just a rare one that had his own personal attack. They asked him to tell them what had happened to him when he was attacked, and here is what he says. Quote, "It was 7 years ago when I was 13. Around 11:30 in the morning, my friends and I went for a swim. They say people on shore were shouting crocodile, but I didn't hear them. The croc grabbed me by the leg. At first, I thought it was one of my friends. I looked back and saw this..."
Freaking imagine that. Just this huge monster grabbing onto you. And it's not like a shark. It's bigger than a shark.
And you can see it above the water.
Oh my God.
I looked back and saw this thing that was huge and old. Then I felt the pain. It was unbelievable. The nearby fishermen beat the water with long poles, startling the crocodile enough for it to loosen its grip on my leg, and then I swam desperately toward the shore with the croc right behind. It was like he was escorting me. He didn't attack, maybe because the fishermen were beating on the water. I turned to look at him and our eyes met. My leg was crushed and some of the calf muscle was torn off.
Oh my God.
I was almost losing my mind because of the pain. So after he gets out of the water, he's taken to the local hospital and the doctors basically tell him, there's no hope to save your leg. We have to amputate it now. His leg is amputated below the knee. He does get asked during this interview, how do you know it was Gustave? Because even though this is like clearly a crocodile that's being spotted repeatedly, they want to know for sure, like, was this Gustave?
It's the shoulder thing.
He replied, I'll tell you how. It's not the shoulder thing. He says, while I was in the hospital, I heard that 4 other people were attacked and eaten at the same beach. 5 attacks at one beach. That's how I know it was Gustave. They know him so well. He's just this thing that shows up and kills people.
That's terrifying, dude.
So he's like, I didn't see the shoulder, but I guarantee it was him because he was huge. And then he went on a murdering spree right after he attacked me and wasn't able to kill me.
Did you look up how many pounds of pressure a croc can, like, crush?
I didn't look it up, but I know that the pound per square inch of a crocodile's bite is the largest number. It's the strongest jaw in the animal kingdom.
It's like impossible to open, but if you want to close it, it's easier
It's like
to
one of
close.
the weakest mouths when it comes to opening its mouth. So you can literally, between your thumb and your forefinger, if their snout is small enough, hold an alligator or a crocodile's mouth closed by pinching it.
Yeah.
Because they're so weak when it comes to opening their mouth.
But like trying to pull it open
is impossible.
Oh my God. That's the idea of that is once it clamps down onto you, it's impossible to pry it off. It's terrifying.
And like, I was reading through this because I wanted to hear more about the death roll. I don't know if you've ever heard about the death roll, but alligators or crocodiles, when they clamp onto something, they tend to spin in the water because they can spin very fast to separate whatever limb that they've bitten from whoever they
rips it off of you.
From whatever they've bitten. And then, you know, they lose strength and they lose blood, obviously. And then other crocodiles come in for the kill. What's crazy about all these experiences, none of the other crocodiles ever hunt what Gustave is hunting. They're not fucking allowed. He's the alpha. It's his meal. It's his hunt. Don't fucking touch it. When he would maul people and then not even eat any of them and just leave them for dead on the shores and they would die on the shores of the beach, the crocodiles wouldn't even come close to it. Nothing would come close to it. The humans were able to retrieve these people, and that's why they were like, he hunts for sport. Like, the other crocodiles won't come and eat this meal even if they're fucking starving, because they're afraid that they're going to get killed by Gustave, which they probably would, because crocodiles will rip each other's limbs off sometimes.
What?
Like the death roll, they'll do that to each other. They'll bite each other's tails or legs,
Oh my God.
which is probably how he got his shoulder injury, was he probably got into it with another bull when he was young.
Well, it looked like one of the croc pictures that you showed me, one of their tails was really short.
It probably got bit off.
The tip of the tail, it was like a stub. It wasn't like the sharp looking tail that you see.
Right.
Man, these things are scary.
So after they speak with this dude, they decide we have to find this crocodile. We have to get him taken in. So they trace him down to a local body of water where he hasn't attacked anyone, but he's been sighted. And they decide that is where they're going to build the cage.
What?
The cage they're going to capture him in.
Okay.
So the cage they make is 30 feet long.
Oh my God.
It is wide enough to accommodate the beast. I think they said it was like 9 feet tall, maybe taller than that. The cage itself weighs over 2,000 pounds. So that's what they've decided that they're going to use to try and catch this crocodile and make sure it doesn't escape. They put an infrared camera inside the cage and then bait at the very back. I can't determine which bait comes first, but here are the baits that they use when they're trying to catch Gustave. They put live chickens into the cage so that they can't escape to lure in Gustave first, and Gustave does not show. They reset the trap and use new live bait, a goat, and again, Gustave does not show. So there's some debate about whether or not this next part happens with the goat or happens with what I'm about to say. I read this in like 3 different places that seem very reliable, so I'm going with this version of the story. So finally, a local sorcerer, is what they say,
probably like a shaman or something,
offers up live bait that he believes will not be able to be resisted by Gustave. This live bait that he offers up is his old, unwanted dog.
No.
So during this attempt,
this man's best friend,
the dog manages to break free of its bindings and escape. It runs away. They have it on camera.
Good.
The dog just fucks off, doesn't come back. It's like, you asshole.
Be free.
He leaves. And so I'm just like, good, that sorcerer's an asshole, sacrificing his familiar. Who does that? So they check the footage to see whether or not the dog got eaten or whether or not the dog escaped. They watch the footage, they see the dog run away, and they're like, okay, well, he got away. While they're watching it, they notice something at the gate of the trap. What looked like 2 large flashlights in the darkness. And they watch it, and finally something moves. And they realize those are not flashlights. They are the eyes of a massive crocodile refracting the light directly at the camera lens.
Wow.
He came to the opening of the cage, stared into it, and then went away. if you see a picture, which if you go to our Instagram or our Facebook, of a crocodile's eyes at night, it's terrifying. It's like when people say that like monsters or demons or whatever have red eyes. They're not red, but they reflect in the light of whatever's available, even if it's super dark. So you just see eyes staring at you. It's haunting. And that's what they saw in this video on their last attempt to bait this cage.
I've seen photos where it's just like just dozens of crocodile eyes.
Just staring at you.
Just staring. Oh my God.
And this is a 20-foot crocodile. So his eyes are enormous. He shows up. He never goes in. The cage itself was there for so long and they attempted so many different ways to lure him that it winds up sinking into the banks of the river because it's so heavy. And the attempt is basically a bust. They can't do it. They missed their window that they were given by the local government to show up, these foreigners to come into their country and hunt this thing. So they would leave because there was some unrest with Burundi's government at the time, and it meant that they would not have any sort of easy time finding cooperation, while there are other changes going on that were more prevalent to all parties involved. The team does return the next year with different traps and different snares in an attempt to capture Gustave. Although they do see him again and there are more attacks the next year, they catch a bunch of crocodiles with all these new different things they bring, but they never catch Gustave. So, reports of the attacks continued in the years that follow after these attempts were made. The last official sighting of Gustave came in 2009 at the mouth of the Ruzizi River, where it meets the lake. Since then, reports of a massive crocodile attacking folks still surface, but no one is quite sure if it is still Gustave because basically no one's there studying it anymore. And the locals probably are pretty sure that it's still him though. Gustave is presumed to be alive to this day and hunting the waters for fresh victims. So, that said, I have a few postscript things. Postscript? PS? Yeah, okay. It just sounds weird. Sometimes words don't make sense. That I need to let you know about. I found an article from a lady named Nikki Dunnington Jefferson, who traveled to Burundi in 2019. In her article, she states that she had hoped to find Patrice when she traveled there and learn of Gustave, but in her travels, she learned that Patrice no longer resides there and that Gustave had been killed.
What?
And she says in her article, like, she was so sad to learn Gustave had been killed.
Okay, no.
There are no more details in her article regarding who killed Gustave, when, or how.
That's what I would want to know.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't be sad that he was killed, but I'd be like, how'd you guys do it?
She's just told in her travels, like, he was killed. That's all she says. I was told he's killed. And then she goes on to say, like, this local legend has a death toll from some that say it was 300, some say 60, and some say as low as 3. And there are literally records that have been uncovered by Patrice, not to mention the death total from a single week in March of 2004 that's documented, where it exceeds 3. There was 5 kids in 7 days that died, where she clearly didn't do her research when she put that in there. So that has me very skeptical of her, like, saying just sort of dismissing that he's dead.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm just like, why would Patrice leave? He lived there. He had been there forever. I'm very curious of why he's no longer there. So I decided to look that up. So here's an interesting postscript for Patrice Faye. He does not live in Burundi anymore. As of 2020, he calls Togo his home. It's another location on the other side of Africa.
Okay.
More towards the Pacific side, not towards the Indian Ocean. Why did he leave, you ask? Well, something kind of crazy went down in April of 2011. Robin's already read my script. So 5 orphan girls in schools that he founded accused him of rape.
That's whoa.
In April of 2011.
What a POS.
So when I read that, I was like, oh my God, that's horrible. And then I went on to read, and this gets really fucking crazy here. So he has a trial that's held July 25th of that same year, 2011. So 3 months later. Prior to the trial, there's no investigation into the accusations. There's no evidence presented at the trial. The entire trial took place in the local language, which he did not speak. The only testimony that was given was that of the girls, whose stories on the stand and recorded record did not match. Cross-examination from his lawyer was not allowed. The girls were never examined for signs of abuse from the time of accusation to the time of the trial or any time thereafter. The trial lasts for 5 hours, and he is sentenced to 25 years in jail and also told he is not allowed any appeal. He is not allowed to present any evidence. This
seems really sketchy.
They're not allowed to cross-examine. None of the descriptions that are of the incidents that occurred match from any of the witnesses, and then he is just judged guilty, thrown in jail for 25 years. His lawyer is like, this is not normal. Like, this is fucking crazy. What is happening? The lawyer's basically told, shut the fuck up. The lawyer winds up getting an interview through a local newspaper with one of the accusers. From what I read, because it's all translated from French, it sounds like what happened here is that the girl was asked to be interviewed by the newspaper. She showed up for the interview, and the other lawyer was there. So this guy's lawyer, Patrice's lawyer, was there to ask her questions. The article is printed. As soon as the article goes to print, the girl is arrested and imprisoned. No trial, straight up imprisoned. So Patrice's lawyer goes and says, look, she talked to us about what happened. Because she talked and she wasn't allowed to, they've thrown her in jail. Within 7 days, people are like, what the hell is happening right now? And they release her after 7 days. They just let her out. They don't tell her anything. They just fucking let her go. So it's just super weird at this point. Now, Patrice's son, who still lives in France, from what I can tell, steps forward and states that his father reached out to him right before he was arrested, or right before he was accused and arrested, about information he had recovered regarding corruption in the government. I don't know if it's local or like the country, that he was telling him he had information about, and he was trying to figure out how to act upon it. Upon trying to act on the evidence of corruption, accusations come out the next day, and then his father is imprisoned, basically with a complete mock of a trial.
So it's like conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he comes out and says that. So Patrice was actually an expat of France when he moved to Burundi. He's not vacationing there. He gave up his citizenship from France to move here. He's an expatriate.
Whoa!
So this thing is so fucked up that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from France gets involved and demands to see everything related to his trial. They want to know everything that happened. They wind up repatriating Patrice Fay from prison so that they have access to everything that they put him through. Once they see all the evidence and the trial and the testimony, they immediately publicly denounce the investigation for having literally no evidence and violating its own constitution, which had been written like 6 years prior, and demanded he be released because of the botched or abandoned investigation and the false testimony. This is 100% real. He's released on October 18th of 2011, 3 months after being imprisoned, and he is sent back to France. I'm not clear on how long he lived in France before he decided to move back to Africa, where he currently resides, from what I can tell, as of 2020, in Togo, but that is where he currently lives. And they turned his story into a novel, which was a bestseller in France, and a movie about being wrongfully imprisoned. So it's a really crazy situation where you can't really say what you believe, but what you do know is that the trial was a complete fucking farce, you know?
Well, and then the French government is like, yo, what the F?
There's a lot of times where foreign governments, regardless of whether or not someone is guilty, especially of sex crimes, will step in and be like, give us our person back, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm not going to go out on a limb here and say that I believe one side or the other. I will say that going through everything that I was able to find from the Burundi websites and the French websites, the trial was complete bullshit, and everyone agrees on that. So they basically let him go, and he was taken back to France, and then he moved down to Togo, which is apparently his new, like, stomping grounds where he's trying to build more schools for kids to learn. And it's like, that doesn't mean this didn't happen. All I can tell you for sure is that the legal process they went through was complete bullshit, and they just tossed him in jail, and they told him, like, you're here for 25 years, there's nothing you could ever do about it.
That's fucking
And if
crazy.
his son hadn't brought something up and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs hadn't gotten involved, he'd still be there to this day. So, yeah, y'all got a quick true crime story out of this one too. But that, my spooky friends, is the tale of Gustave the Man-Eater.
And Patrice Fay.
And Patrice Fay, who is a very fascinating, interesting individual when it comes to hunting monsters and possibly being one. So,
Oh my god.
it's crazy shit, man. Like, when I was trying to wrap up my script, I was like, oh my god, like, this is gonna wind up being a whole fucking different topic. And I was like, no. It's not that long. They keep a lot of details of his personal life out of this, because once he got out, they're just like, he just wants to go back to living like a normal human being. But, yeah, it was kind of crazy. Like, I was trying to find stuff between like 2004 and 2011 about how he was involved in politics, how he was opening these schools, and there's just nothing to be found.
It's just, how do you give up your OG citizenship? That's nuts.
Like, we were watching something at one of our friends' houses about Americans that traveled to other places, and someone was an expatriate from the United States, and they were taken to go hang out with other expatriates, you know?
What was it called?
Oh, no, she wasn't an expatriate. The guy was trying to convince her to marry him and move to his country.
Yes.
So he introduced her
to a bunch of expatriates.
U.S. expatriates, so they could tell her how great it was. And they were all female. And so
they were all hot.
The chick got super
jelly.
Super jelly.
It was 90 Day Fiancé.
Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I couldn't quite remember which one it was, but yeah. So when I read that he was an expat, I was like, he gave up his citizenship. Like, this isn't just he moved or he had dual citizenship. Like, he forfeited his citizenship at some point. And I was like, I'm just not going to go back. And they had to repatriate him to just look into his shit, because they're like, they were basically told by the Burundi government, like, he's not French. You have no jurisdiction here. Don't fucking talk to us.
That's
nuts. And he was in a jail, and they did it. They were like, he actually is a Frenchman again, so tell us everything. So it totally blew my mind. It was almost something that was crazier than a fucking crocodile that's killed 300 human beings.
Oh my god. Your topic this week was a trip.
I didn't realize, doing it in this order, which was not intended at all, that I have steadily escalated in kill totals for these creatures, because first it was the Jaws shark that killed like 7 people, and then it was 2 lions between them that killed like 130 people, and now we have one big boy crocodile that's killed 300 people, so...
Wait till next week.
Next week we won't top the total, but we might top the shock. So you hang on to the edge of your seat, and we'll see you next week. That would have been really cool if that was the end of the show, but it's not.
No, it's not. Alright, thank you everybody. Hopefully you got to the end of this episode. If you did, please support us by going to our Patreon, patreon.com/Scaryish podcast. Tiers there do start at $1. All your donations, go to helping us upgrade our studio setup, all that fun stuff. There's actually physical merch tiers as well when it comes to Patreon. If you do $10 and above, I am mailing out keychains for you folks sometime in the next month or 2. And then I am working on some other stuff on the side as well, hopefully for you guys. But if you're not into Patreon, you can actually go to ko-fi.com/Scaryish podcast. And we're really thankful. We really couldn't be this far in the podcast without you guys. So thank you.
Absolutely. If you have a story you would like to share with us as well, please feel free to reach out. We take supernatural, spiritual, coincidental, sometimes true crime. If you have a story about a man-eating crocodile, that would be super cool too. And if you have any stories like that, you can reach out to storytime@scaryish.com. You can also hit us up on any of our social medias. Facebook is facebook.com/Scaryish podcast. Twitter is @Scaryish pod. Instagram is @Scaryish podcast. Or you can go to our website, scaryish.com, and click on contact us, fill out that form. It comes directly to us. We would love to hear from you. That said, this is the end of episode 179. So, Robin, go ahead and sign us out.
Keep on creeping on, and try not to get eaten by crocodiles.
Good advice. Bye.